Whenever you think of the term drug lord, you probably think of one of the big ones that everyone knows about, El Chapo, Pablo Escobar, and other such names. One that you probably don't know about and may not have heard about before is Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, despite the fact that he is very likely one of the most influential drug lords to ever live. Commonly known by his nickname El Padrino, which means the Godfather, Gallardo is one of the pioneers of the modern drug trade and is one of the biggest traffickers in all of Mexico's history. He has massive power and standing in the world of the illegal drug trade and was often referred to as El Jefe de Jefes, which directly translates to the boss of bosses. Of course, this notorious drug lord didn't start out in such a powerful position. He actually didn't have any relatives or anything within the cartels, so he didn't get an easy start like many of the others that currently run them. In fact, Gallardo began with next to nothing and built his powerful empire from the ground up, using his skills and cunning in order to accomplish his goals. Gallardo was born on a ranch in 1946 at the outskirts of Culiacan, Sinaloa, and after he graduated from high school, he went on to attend classes at a local college for business. He actually began his life on the right path, and at the age of only 17, he joined the Mexican law enforcement in order to become an agent of the Mexican Federal Judicial Police. After that, he worked as a family bodyguard for the governor of Sinaloa State. It was his access to the governor's connections that gave him the boost he needed in order to start his incredibly lucrative career in drug trafficking. Eventually, he would go on to form his own cartel, known as the Guadalajara cartel. The cartel was led by Gallardo and two of his associates. Gallardo was largely responsible for the corruption of high-ranking government officials in order to let them get away with whatever they wanted, mostly through his connections with the then governor of Sinaloa. His associates, who had worked in a different drug cartel before joining Guadalajara, took control of that cartel's roots after its leader was shot and killed by the Mexican police. In the 1970s, the Mexican government began a covert anti-drug campaign known as Operation Condor, which they hoped would be able to lessen the transportation of drugs within Mexico and outward into the United States. In response to this, many drug traffickers from Sinaloa State settled at Guadalajara in order to regroup and re-begin their drug trading. This is what eventually led to the creation of the Guadalajara cartel, with Gallardo running it at the forefront. Gallardo had been arrested before for drug trafficking and was already wanted by the law, but despite this, he was instrumental in driving the growth of the cartel and ensuring that it would become massive and successful. He succeeded in this, considering Mexican officials would later refer to the Guadalajara cartel as Mexico's largest drug smuggling empire. The cartel was incredibly quick, and they opened massive marijuana plantations in hard-to-reach places like mountains and empty fields. The yield of their plants was low, however, and their quality varied. Transportation was also an issue, as it was incredibly expensive to transport drugs up and down a mountain. Eventually, however, things would change when they began using a new type of marijuana seed developed by American cannabis cultivators. The resulting crops were actually seedless, which made them more potent and led to a higher quality. This allowed them to sell their product for higher prices than before, significantly increasing their profit margin. The cartel would eventually move a large portion of their operation into the middle of vast deserts because it would help to reduce the cost of transportation. This only brought along new problems, however, as they had to pay massive bribes in order to have wells dug for irrigation. The cartel also managed to keep the locations of their plantations a secret through large bribes as well as intimidation in some cases. Over time, these tactics helped the cartel grow, and they eventually moved past marijuana being the only source of their wealth. At the time, Colombian drug kingpins were the major source of cocaine entering the United States, but they had to change their delivery routes because of the increased law enforcement activity along their usual routes. Gallardo agreed to help them smuggle the cocaine through Mexico and into the United States, but he said that he would be taking a 50% cut of the cocaine they were smuggling in order to pay for the costs. This turned out to be an incredibly profitable deal for Gallardo, and it was brilliant of him to take the product like that rather than accepting upfront cash. This is because it is believed that the flow of cocaine made the cartel around $5 billion annually, which is far more than any kingpin would have ever been able to pay. At the height of the cartel's success, it was responsible for most of the drug trafficking in Mexico and along the United States border. Its influence extended far past its Sinaloa origins, all the way throughout the country and bleeding up into the southern states. The cartel had become so influential that they had almost monopolized drug trading and trafficking within Mexico. That is a massive deal, considering how many cartels have existed and competed together in the past. Gallardo's brilliance and understanding of the intricacies of trading allowed him to build the cartel into a massive powerhouse that nobody could have expected. He was also able to utilize the connections he'd made with the government in order to get them out of particularly sticky situations, or to ask that certain things be overlooked during a certain time. One particularly valuable connection was that with the Mexican DFS, an intelligence and security agency. At the time, it was completely corrupt, as a large portion of the members were directly involved with the workings of the cartel, including drug trafficking and even murder at the expense of the cartel. Everything was going well for Gallardo, and he was running things with incredible efficiency within Mexico. He was in position to flourish for a very long time. In 1980, however, the United States Drug Enforcement Agency assigned a special agent named Enrique to their agency in Guadalajara. Soon enough, he discovered one of the plantations of the cartel, which was subsequently destroyed. A few years later, he was able to locate another cartel, which was much larger and actually protected by DFS agents. Thousands of workers tended to the plantations, which yielded an annual revenue of about $8 billion. All of the operations took place despite the local police and politicians knowing about it, due to the bribery and corruption by the cartel. This plantation was later raided and destroyed too, however, and Enrique gradually worked to expose connections between the Guadalajara cartel and the rest of the Mexican government. Gallardo didn't ignore Enrique's work, and he knew that he needed to stop him. On February 7, 1985, Enrique was kidnapped by Mexican law enforcement agents working for the cartel. Shortly after that, his helicopter pilot was also kidnapped. Both men were tortured and interrogated for more than 30 hours, being kept awake the entire time, and eventually they were killed. The bodies of these two men were discovered shortly after, and once the USA discovered that one of their agents had been murdered, they became enraged. They launched a full-scale investigation for the murder, which turned out to be the largest DEA investigation ever over a homicide. A special unit was sent to Mexico in order to coordinate with Mexican law enforcement, and soon enough, Gallardo and his two associates were named as the primary suspects. The associates were eventually captured and charged with the murder of Enrique, and they were thrown into jail. Gallardo, however, remained free and still enjoyed some level of political protection. He moved with his family in order to stay safe, but eventually he was arrested in Guadalajara along with 6 Mexican law enforcement officers, all with connections to the cartel. Gallardo's arrest is said to have been executed fairly cleanly, without a single shot fired. Gallardo was sentenced to 40 years in prison, being convicted of crimes like drug trafficking, racketeering, and multiple violent crimes. He was 43 years old at the time of his arrest, but was the most wanted drug lord in the world. He was incredibly wealthy at the time of his arrest, with a net worth of over $500 million at the time of his arrest. Despite all of the crimes being levied against him, he denied having any say in the murder of Enrique, even when he was later resentenced after being found guilty in his murder. The arrest and sentencing of Gallardo should have been the end of his reign, but even behind bars, his influence shone through. He continued to run the operations through his cell phone, maintaining his title as a major kingpin in the nation. He divided his empire into smaller sections, all under the control of less popular kingpins, and even gave the plan to his lawyer, who gathered the drug lords and divided the territory among them as Gallardo had instructed. The kingpin reasoned that with the empire divided up like this, things would run more smoothly, as he could directly communicate his plans to each of the drug lords. This plan worked for a few years, but eventually ended when he transferred to a maximum security prison. As he was being transported, Gallardo reportedly cried, saying that this would be the end of him and his empire. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts about Gallardo and let us know what you'd like to see in the next video.